We are in Romans chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, stopping before probably some of my favorite parts, which is the good finger pointing and going, that's why it is that. That's why the world's the way that it is. And delving into understanding, in some ways, the slavery of the Bible. A little bit the slavery of the Bible. Not that, and this is far different than the slavery of the United States. That's a part of critical race theory. It's a part of the 1619 project. And so we won't do so much about the history of the United States with this versus that kind of slavery, but if that discussion merits, then we'll certainly will have that. And so our topic is being a slave to Jesus, subtitled, Can't Go For That. No, can't do it. Thank you very much. So where Romans 18 through the end of the chapter tells you why the world is in the state that it's in, which is kind of the answer, generic answer for why do bad things happen to good people. So for you folks that struggle with that question when it's asked to you, in addition to using the apologetics that Steve's helped us to have access to on the apologetics channel in Slack, Romans 18 through the rest of chapter 1 gives a reason as to why the world is yucky. Right there. Okay? And it's because the Lord has given us what we wish. Yep. And what we wish is we don't want to be with him. We don't want to honor him. We don't want to do what he'd like us to do. So we get to have our way. And that's what 3-year-olds like to do. And so the Lord has allowed us to be big 3-year-olds, and he's given us our way. Now, here's the other icky thing about that before we start reading. Recognize he doesn't just give you your way in this lifetime. He's also going to give you your way after this lifetime. So that means if you think God is icky, yucky, cosmic killjoy, no fun, stinky, don't want to be there, then you get your way for the rest of eternity. So the next life, you don't have to put up with icky, yucky Yahweh God or Jesus. You get to be separate from him, never having to worry about that responsibility or singing or being joyful. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You get what you want.
But it's a different worry.
Yeah. From ever letting up the worry.
Yeah. This reminds me of something I did read in that Geisler book. Before C.S. Sorry.
Speak up, not stand up. Okay, project from the diagram.
Say, son of a... What are you talking about? What's Kathleen?
There you go.
Sorry, they started over here. In this book, they quote C.S. Lewis, and what he says is in the end, and in the end is very key, there are really only two kinds of people. The ones that will say,
Yes.
you will be done to God, and then the ones that God says, you will be done to them.
Correct. And that feels like it's a harsh reality, but that is a very quick picture for you when you get posed the questions, why do bad things happen to good people? It's right there in the second part of Romans that we're not studying. This first part of Romans 1 through 17 is going to have a discussion about what it should look like when you profess/possess Jesus in a relationship with him. Okay? So, let's read it. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle and set apart, church, ecclesia, church, set apart for the gospel of God, the gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures regarding his Son, who is to whom his human nature was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was declared with power to be the Son of God by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. Through him and for his name's sake we received grace and apostleship to call people from among all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith. And you also are among those who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. That's going to be interesting once we get there. To all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve with my whole heart in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now, at last by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. Doesn't happen. Not the way you want it to. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I planned many times to come to you, but I've been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among other Gentiles. I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish, and that is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are at Rome. Not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteousness will live by faith. That's a lot of fun stuff here, but those of you doing a really good job reading through the Bible right now, I know Terry on the back for doing that because he's just finished the New Testament and then he's going back through the New Testament. And if you're not in the habit of reading the Bible, when you read the Bible, it feels like it's drudgery because there's symbols, there's pictures, there's truths and facts that just don't really relate to your time. They're anachronistic. They're out of time for you. You just don't understand them sometimes. And so it gets really easy to blow over this stuff or to just find it so archaic, you don't want to read it. It's almost like for those of us that aren't English fans, it's like reading Chaucer. It's like reading Shakespeare. It's like reading Milton. It's like reading some of whom we call the great authors of our time and going, I don't want to read Homer. I don't want to read Virgil. That language is just so stilted. I can't get my head around wanting to read that. Yes, sir.
One of my ancestors is actually a friend of Milton. And after I finished this Norman Geisler book, I said, oh, if I ran across it, it was free.
Yeah.
I think I'll go ahead and read this, Paradise Lost.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started reading this, and I'm going to have to say, the Bible is easier.
Oh, yeah. The romantic authors, they're English. Typically, it doesn't mean what it says literally. It means something else. You have to know symbology. You have to know the history of the person writing. So whether it's Keats, Byron, Shelley, Yeats, all of that stuff, Coleridge, it gets so that you say, I'd rather someone sticks pins in my temples. Bible can be like that too. And so the way that we study the Bible is typically by going through almost a backdoor approach.
You're speaking of your teaching method, right?
Okay.
Just want to make sure.
Means that many adults are not necessarily eager to go sign me up for learning. So what we do is we take a look at things that you're vested in, things that are important to you, things that matter to you, in order to show you that those same things matter to Yahweh God.
Amen.
Those same things matter to Jesus, and he's going to tell you about them in a lot of books. It's just you may not know it because when you read it, it feels stilted and it feels like it doesn't apply to you, yet it does.
Amen.
Okay? And so what we started out talking with over the past week was embarrassment versus shame. And what I hope that you learn through our exchanges is this. Embarrassment, for the most part, is a short-term thing. Embarrassment is short-term. That's why when you do something silly among your friends, and this probably happened more when you were a teenager, it didn't last because you made fun of some goober or some goofy thing that happened, and you may have gotten a nickname for it, but it wasn't necessarily the thing that made you not want to hang out with your friends. It was just the kind of thing, you're Pinky Tuscadero, or you're the Fonz. You get a nickname because of this goofy thing that you've done. And shame is this thing that's perpetual, is this thing that makes you want to be isolated, makes you want to be alone, because you feel as though your self-worth is in question when you have a sense of shame. And sometimes there's similar circumstances that come in to create embarrassment or shame, but typically they're very, very different kind of situations that promote embarrassment versus shame. And embarrassment is a short-term kind of thing. You get over it pretty quickly. Shame sometimes lasts for the duration of your life. And when you start to think about that kind of thing, when you even apply it to Jesus's life, I would almost say Jesus's life and Jesus's murder. There are elements of shame all throughout those. And that's partly why when we have the next study that we do about grace, maybe you'll embrace it differently when you recognize that the shame of everything has been borne by Jesus, including the elements of his death that we as United States people are loath sometimes to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this is really key when you read Paul saying, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus because it's salvation, right? And it's partly because Paul understands something, and I'm doing a little bit of scripture stuff, but we're going to jump back in the lesson. Paul understands something we modern day Christians don't. And it has to do with shame and embarrassment. And it has to do with, he doesn't say I'm not embarrassed, I'm not ashamed. Because Jesus, when Jesus paid it all and it is finished, that is a huge, huge statement. And that song that we rarely sing very much anymore is a huge testimony. And so when Jesus says, if you're ashamed of me before men, then before my Father, I will be ashamed of you. And that's because when Jesus came as the suffering servant, right, he took all of potentially the shame / almost even embarrassment that we would have to deal with onto himself. And when we don't recognize that, then we sit around and we are allowing ourselves to create a whole bunch of shame / embarrassment about saying, yes, I believe in Jesus. And these times when people are forced to stay away from each other, when people are dying left and right from only one thing, yes, I believe in Jesus. And it will get tougher and tougher, folks, to put your hand up and say, and stand out and say, I speak for Jesus, if you take a look at the signs that are in front of us in terms of separating people into camps. And the worst hate speech in this climate of all is going to be, I believe in Jesus. Coming soon to a theater and a neighborhood near you. Right? Questions, comments about that as we just did a brief review of embarrassment versus shame. Sound kind of familiar? All right. So we ended with a discussion that you'll see the virtual bullet here that actually needs to almost have 3 parts. And that's because when Bruce was last with us, we probably need to differentiate even this one. So the questions that are on your study sheet is what is a volunteer? What is a servant? But there probably needs to be a 3rd question. And we'll tackle that one too. And here's the 3rd question. What's an employee? Okay? So let's take a look at all 3 of those. What's your definition of a volunteer?
Mine was just someone who does something for no monetary gain.
Okay, yep.
Because typically when you're volunteering, you're giving of your time.
Give me yourself.
Yes.
That's a long time.
I ignore that.
She was there getting all the time. Sounds like your machine's trying to give the definition.
Probably.
She was listening.
I don't know.
Passage, exactly. So
Yes.
So Sarah suggests that it's contributing, it's giving of yourself without payment.
Usually you're interested in something.
I like that. Yes, I like that a lot.
You're getting to pay off somehow.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because we got stuck with that last time we did this, where folks were thinking that it was altruistic.
Yes, that's what I think.
That they were giving so selflessly, but I would suggest very strongly to you, when we volunteer, it's usually something we pick and choose to do. For instance, very few of us are going to volunteer to clean latrines.
Well, a lot of times you're also volunteering for the networking capabilities.
Ooh, certainly.
But for your, again, it's your gain though.
It's a resume.
There's something for you to gain out of volunteering.
Okay.
Be real, yeah.
We do this with our kids. When our kids are in high school and college, we encourage them to volunteer so they get resume bullets so that they become more viable in the employment market.
Well, also something like get in school. It's also good in your school application, right?
Yep.
You know, especially if you're up against a
You've
bunch
seen
of
different-
people, because nowadays you actually have to interview to be accepted to a school,
That is correct.
which is very interesting in my mind.
Well,
But anyway, that's not even this discussion. But a lot of that volunteerism, and I'll use quotes around
Yeah.
it, it's to help kind of further you into being placed in a better light than perhaps somebody else vying for the same position you're applying for, whether it's in school or work or whatever.
So listen to what you guys are saying. And this is why this is fun to do this kind of discussion to help you see the biblical applications to our life. You're saying that volunteerism includes doing something without financial remuneration, but you've also been savvy enough to say, but there's an interest that you have in what it is you're volunteering in. And I like that Sarah just kind of said this, if it wasn't Diane. Sometimes, and watch this, and I want you to understand the particulars of the contradiction here. Sometimes you're forced into volunteering. Now, there's a problem with that, is there not? There's a problem with being forced into volunteering.
Yes, because to the devil.
Yes.
Yes, because if you're pushed into it, you're not necessarily putting your best effort into it either. Because you're doing it because you've been told to do it, but you really don't want to, so you're going to do it halfway. I would use a different term, but I'm being recorded. And just do what you need to do to maybe just get it done, but not necessarily because you don't like it. You're not going to put your best foot forward.
But you're volunteering, right?
Well, you're volunteering because somebody forced you to. Your parents signed you up for it. Right?
Or your boss.
Or your boss signed you up for it.
Yeah. School counselor said this will be beneficial to you. You could-
You need to do this now. And you're like, fine.
Usually we like to volunteer where we're comfortable. It's within our skill.
That is in our circle of, yes.
Comfort. Comfort.
I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. I will throw this one out because I usually don't go here, but because of what you just opened up, I will. I'll throw this out. That kind of volunteerism also is featured in our churches.
What's expected of us too. We really do. That's good. That's forced volunteering.
Well, it's more like you need a position filled.
Right.
Nobody signs up for it. You're like, all right. Or you go to somebody else, and Plus and I've been in the organizational committee. You go,
For this.
you're good for this. Yeah,
Right. And sometimes we look at what they do on
Mhm.
the private level
yeah.
in their jobs and we say, oh, they work in accounting, so we didn't get them in the treasury. Yeah, I was like, that might not be where their giftedness necessarily.
Or they work in an administrative position, so they'd be great organizing something.
Right.
Maybe not.
Right. Or maybe they like a break
Yeah.
from what their job is.
True. But sometimes you don't want to have all that, or that pressure on you to do something. You just want to, you'll do something, but you don't necessarily want to do the same thing.
Right. Right. So there's an unpaid component to it. There's sometimes what am I getting out of this component? And there's also sometimes a component of, okay, I'll do it.
They'll probably jump in the gun a little bit here. But I'm gonna say anyway, since you brought in churches. I think that's why that you see churches, people, when they're volunteered for certain things, or they volunteer for certain things, and things get a little tough, they tend to bail because they're just almost a volunteer. But people leave churches as well.
Or they run in late, or they run out early, so that whoever had asked them, there's a good chance to.
Yeah, because if they're coming in like breath of wire, right? Nobody can talk to you. And if you leave during the prayer or whatever, or the final song, before somebody can get to you and you hightail it out, nobody can ask you to do anything. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, don't need to be sorry. You guys are right now you're bringing the fun.
I think it might be good to take a look at different from the voluntold thing to actual volunteering, the pure definition.
Yes.
I think that one of the things, two characteristics of it is number one, absence of remuneration. Number two, typically when all other benefits aside, you're going to volunteer for something that you have an interest or passion for, and you're not going to volunteer for those things that are going to be counter to that. An example is I would get emails at work that say, hey, we need a volunteer for this, Friday. Okay, no, thank you. I'm not going to be interested in that. It is contrary to my beliefs. But volunteering to pass out coats for the Salvation Army, sure, let me do that. I can do that. So there is an evaluation that we go through when we are given an opportunity to volunteer, truly volunteer, not volunteer. And then we can say whether or not it's something that we can support, we can actually be a part of, we can actually have a passion for.
Okay. Yeah, I think that works. And I think that there is an assessment done by the person volunteering to say, do I identify with that?
Exactly.
What am I getting out of it? What's the benefit? Because even though there's not cash, typically, even if it's just peace of mind, that's why we volunteer.
I had a lady who volunteered to meet me.
Yep.
She had just moved in
Yep.
the area.
Okay. Yeah, look, you remember something from a generation ago that's been replaced digitally was the welcome wagon. The welcome wagon were people who had, I don't want to say the gift of hospitality, but probably were less afraid of people than say, well, Steve. So they would show up when you moved in.
That was Gene.
Right.
Man, Gene showed up at our door.
Right.
Okay, can't find us.
In our house, we had the other across the neighbor come over and show up. Literally, they were moving in, Tony. So yeah, but that doesn't happen very much anymore.
No, and it won't happen in the current environment because disease may be visiting you. But in the old days, that's what we used to do. We do it now kind of through next door and that kind of virtual hug kind of thing. But in the old days, there would be people who, even if they might be even getting out of it, not just practicing cordiality and practicing courtesy, but possibly making a new connection. So there's a reason why people typically volunteer, even if they don't get money.
And thought just hit me too that there's nothing better than a group of volunteers to make friends with because they're all there for the same. Met very few volunteers that didn't have a good heart.
So I like hearing that. Now, see, you opening up another jar.
Just hit me because I'm thinking about my opportunities where I volunteered. I was made friends and we always got it's fine.
So I like Terry saying that, but my experience with volunteers isn't the one that Terry's had. I've been involved with volunteers where some of them compare their level of volunteering to others.
Oh, you got to speak to me about that.
And they get attitudinal.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And then there's cliques that sometimes happen in volunteering because people are more like others, and then it gets sometimes weirdly divisive. So people start off being philanthropic, perhaps, and in a good mindset, and then sometimes because of the nature of people, you almost don't want to volunteer there because it's too cliquey. It's too high school election.
Do you think maybe some of that is the person thinking that?
I think it's people. Anytime you got people, you got people.
I think it's some of that perception.
Well,
One individual here speaking right now, maybe.
I appreciate this. Terry's saying maybe it's the problem of the moderator who's got that understanding. So let me address what Terry said. My wife and I have a very favorite thrift store that we go to, and it's for the school system in the county. And they raise money, and all the money goes to the school system to help with impoverished kids and supplies, etc. But all the workers, with the exception of maybe the GM and the manager, are all volunteers. And many of them don't like each other.
It's crazy.
Many of them don't like being paired with other folks because they don't work as well. They don't have the same kind of temperament. And so perhaps instead of maybe building bridges to better figure out how to do that because we're all here for the same reason, they spend time sometimes talking about how they don't like it. That's an
That's probably your HOAs. Your HOAs are people
Tired. That's a different.
that used to be,
it's volunteers.
a big muckety muck at somewhere, and now there's a big muckety muck. It's going to tell you your mailbox is rusty and needs to be.
But that's volunteerism for the point of having influence over other people.
Because they get something out of it.
Most volunteers don't have inherent power or authority given to volunteers.
No.
HOAs there are.
Okay, but in every volunteer situation, there's a what am I getting out of it? I remember we briefly touched on this when we were last time together. We were talking about board of directors. In the old days, your board of directors were voluntary. Now they get stipends, but now they also then have influence in a lot of different ways that create bullet points for them. So now, if they're a part of the board, they now have political entry and potentially also get offers as CEOs, CFOs, CIOs of other places because they're on the board of Exxon, because they're on the board of Tesla. Right? And so when you start looking at all of the tendrils there, that word that is ideally a great, great word has a lot of potential downfalls because of the people involved. The people.
Go into any situation as being humble, as Paul talks about over and over and over and over, being humble for God. Mend a lot of those bridges and even assist in other people mending bridges. A lot of this takes dialogue. You need to go in there and say, I am who I am. I'm no better than anybody else. And you just start from that point. Because it's hard to do. But it kind of breaks down some of those things. People, I think, recognize that. And most do, not ever, not all. Some people take advantage of that.
You guys hear what Terry just said? Terry says you go into a situation with a sense of humility, which is kind of in some ways defined by this. Excuse me, I don't esteem myself to be any better than anybody here. In fact, I'm here in some ways not only to get the job done the way we want to do it, but I'm here to look out for you first before I look out for me.
Condition of the heart. I mean, I love the positive attitude. I have that too, and I always try to see
I
the best in people.
But yeah,
But I think that can make a difference.
Yeah, but you can't. It's that everybody doesn't approach it with the same sense of humility, folks.
That's true.
And sometimes when you have an equally yoked folks in a situation and they can't figure out where the common ground is, you've got peopleistic junk. You've got politics.
I don't do that at all.
Politics?
Politics. I've never been able, I don't have that suspicious attitude. I'm not looking to see who's trying to do in the end. I do have the positive approach. And I mean, neighbor down the street, you're talking about the welcome wagon. We moved in, we're unloading a truck, and a guy came to the block, came over, introduced himself, and actually brought us some donuts from the neighborhood bakery. And this is in May, so this is like during pandemic. And he comes over and does this. Turns out to be a Christian. He volunteers at Habitat for Humanity, so he's going and helping build houses. And I'm not sure what sort of benefit he's looking to get out of that, if any. I think he's just trying to help people. So, but the politics, I never was able to do that real well in the office. Never been able to do that real well in churches. I've gotten stopped with that. So I'm with you. Let's be positive about it, and the naysayers need to probably approach. I'm also not good at that.
Internally, I'm not very good at it. Externally, I'm just okay. But I'm thinking things that I could never say because I won't be in a situation much longer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's it's like that's what I like about the New Testament. It's when you speak comes from your soul. What you hear, what you take in, gets digested, but they never say anything about what you're thinking. They do, but they don't. It comes down to the words you use, and that's why I'm trying. I think one improves the other as you watch your tongue. I think it does improve your thoughts, but it's still, doing counseling for some other things, and one of the things they asked the other day is, I am a what? A blank. And I said, I'm black and white, because even though I'm saying one thing, I can be thinking exactly the opposite. Or I'm an engineer. I'm always weighing A versus B, and I can't help it. It's always, and I take both sides of the argument because I prepare for the side that I don't like, and I want to enforce the side I do. So it's always a constant thing. Most people like that. And you try to act a certain way, but you're thinking something, yeah, I'm glad to see you, Preston. Yeah, this guy, look, I can find something wrong with everybody. We all can. It's a real struggle. It's a real struggle.
I think when we're honest, that's probably where we need to hover, where you are right there. And I will say the Bible talks a whole lot about what's up here.
Mhm.
It may not seem like it because of the language. The heart is decidedly wicked.
Yeah,
Who can know it?
it is.
Right? And then if you want to see the treatise in the New Testament about shut up it, that's the book of James.
But we're talking about what we speak, though, is what the consensus we're going to get for the most part. You know,
Okay.
we're working on that.
Okay, so we are evaluated by the people in our lives by what we say. We're evaluated by our Lord
Okay,
on
that's
what's
fair.
in here.
That's fair.
Right? Because he looks on the inward man,
Right.
right? See David, see Jesse, versus on the fluff that we all show.
And Jesus was very, very clear when he said that the outward action isn't so much as the inward attitude.
Correct. Correct. And so it's there, Terry. When you talk about the richness of the New Testament in some ways being more accessible to us, well, sure, it's closer to our modern times. But yeah, what you're reading in the book in the New Testament is more Paul watching stuff and going, guys, here's what you're doing well. Here's what you're messing up. And where we're messing up has not changed. Now, the Old Testament has a more patriarchal, is the establishment of a lot of the anchors and the foundations of what it is that has come down to us through Jesus, but it's also the Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. That's a part of all the Old Testament. The New Testament is, oh, Jesus is already here. Why are you still messing up? Jesus already came. You got this mostly right, but then you're doing all this stuff. So it's viable to have those kind of exchanges and discussions. And that's exactly why we do this, to recognize, look, it was 2,000 years ago, but people problems haven't changed.
I think there's also some validity to what Terry's saying in that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So sometimes that which is in comes out. And I just read recently The Rich Young Ruler again. And I saw something I had not noticed before. Jesus says to him, you know, you lack one thing, go sell everything you possess and follow me. And he goes away sadly, and all of a sudden I saw something a little differently than I hadn't figured out before. He goes away sadly because he didn't possess anything. It all possessed him. Yeah. And that was an attitude issue. So when you do things that will reveal the attitude.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous in that even when we take a look at this volunteerism, some of that aspect that Gene just described, that Terry's talking about, that's why we volunteer. Because on the one hand, it makes us feel good, and it may make us look good. And then on the other hand, messing with my time. I didn't want to do this for all of this. And now that I'm here, now you're expecting me to do all of this. That's the Terry stuff. That's the funny thing that over the years, the angel devil on your shoulder thing, right? That's what that is. This is a good thing that you're doing that. These people want way too much of you, Jimmy. Ask for a few shekels. But this is the way to do this. This is exactly what you should be about. Not on my time, Sonny.
Get to that point where whatever's going on.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not work.
Yeah.
Does anybody really care?
Yes.
It's just go on and on.
Yes, and you heard me tell you, this was the statement that a sound person in a church made when they were in the process of making some vital contributions, and they said, let's get the paid guy. I don't get paid to do this in a church worship setting. So yes, that's what happens. Now, not all the time, but probably the common threads are, I don't get paid. I'm doing this because in some ways I get something from it. And there may be forced volunteering that happens along the way while I'm volunteering. You're asking me for too much, you're asking me for too long, you're asking too often. Make sense? Folks in virtual land? Okay. So what's the definition of an employee?
All of what we just said, only with payment.
Okay. State that.
And I guess, yeah, because sometimes you have a job just to have a job. And it may not be necessarily what you want to do, but it's what you God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens, right?
Yeah.
You know, so,
The expectations are more, hammered out when you're an
well,
employee.
you also get evaluations as an
Ah.
employee, but not necessarily as a volunteer.
So like a volunteer, you might not be on your top game, but what can they do about it?
But as an employee, you get your standards, you get your standards, right?
Because you are not doing what I told you.
Ah,
You say, bye.
I'm out here. Right.
But as an employee, you have those, you need to get threes or better on your performance evaluations, or you're gonna get, you're not gonna get promoted, you're gonna get on,
Corrective action.
corrective action, and you could get terminated,
Right.
you know? So, well, okay, fired, maybe terminated is not the right word.
No, terminate.
Yeah, you know, well, some people terminated are gonna kill me, but I like what Gene said, that
Hi, Sarah.
it's a volunteer, but you're getting, it's almost like the same thing, but you're getting paid for it. And again, sometimes you're doing it because you've been forced into it.
Okay, goodbye, Sarah. James.
Should I take my toys and leave now?
And as an employer, they can ask more of you.
That's
Like where I worked in Oregon, they always wanted you to be improving and moving to the next level. And if you weren't, it was almost like you were going against the culture of the company.
Yeah.
It's the upper duties as assigned.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you get your job responsibilities and then.
Upper duties as assigned.
Yeah.
Right.
But let's focus again on this. Why do you aspire to do these incredulous job duties and responsibilities when you're an employee? Why do you, I'm sorry, what does that mean, sir?
That means I need to buy groceries.
Well, I would say yes, but as your career develops, the money part of it does not become the factor. And it becomes a percentage of the factor, but it's not, it gets less and less, I would argue, as you go along.
Sometimes you do stuff because you want to do what's right by the company.
Okay,
Steve and I have this conversation because of some things that I do that are not part of my job description.
correct.
And they're not even really my job duties.
Yep.
But I feel like I need to do them so that stuff goes out correctly.
Yep.
So this is a point of contention between us.
Yes.
He's like, it's not your job. I'm like, but
I think that was coming.
that's why I was waiting.
I'm not cautioning you not to do your job.
I know. I know.
Good job and take pride in what you do.
I agree.
What I'm saying is that the error will never get fixed if you correct it for something.
And that's sometimes what I do too. So I mean,
It's taking responsibility.
yeah.
So the key with what Sarah said is always this, always goes to this. When you start a sentence with, I feel like, I think, to me, in my opinion, what happens after, what comes afterwards is relative to you. It is not an empirical truth. And so that juxtaposition that exists there with these two employees of two separate companies evaluating the contribution is a fair one, because when you think that something needs to be done, that doesn't say that's what needs to be done. And as an old compliance guy, my axiom is this: if we've got an employee who's exemplary who leaves the company, we now don't know what's broken because the one person on their personality alone has been making things work, making the buses, the trains work on time. And we didn't know that there's a systemic issue because we've had somebody personally being responsible for it. Like Sarah. I wasn't naming her name,
I
but
mean, like, she steps in and fills the gap, so therefore you don't know the core issue there, right? She can take care of it, which is what you're talking.
systemic versus personality. And that's a different discussion, but look, employee, oh, go
But
ahead.
in fairness to her, she has reached out to the manager of this person and
Every week.
pointed out the
Every week.
and pointed out the issue. The problem is he has no motivation to correct it as long as she can.
Yes, it's.
Sometimes, and this is like almost a parenting thing, guys, and you have to get behind this. Sometimes you gotta let the consequences happen.
That's certain person fails.
You gotta let them, if there's no fire and no one's gonna die, you gotta let the bomb go off. Yes, that's where I think Sarah lives, is that she owns quality and owns such positive contribution. She can't let that happen on the company's sake. But sometimes, in order for it to be a systemic repair, you gotta let the bomb go off. Because other than that, when you leave, the bomb's gonna go off every week.
Or you should flow the river though too, and get around people and
But it's an individual doing it as opposed to a systemic fix. But look at the grandiose kind of conversation.
One of the other things that's different between employment versus volunteerism is that there's an underlying attitude difference, and that is with a volunteer has a more readiness to
Yes.
things are not what they want.
Yes.
Whereas
Yes.
as an employee, there's a different kind of
Yes.
vestedness. And what has to happen in order for the employee to leave is that the benefits that you derive, just like you derive them from volunteerism, now do not outweigh the discomfort of doing the work.
Correct. And that's where the money issue changes, because the benefits of what your job is sometimes outweigh the money that you make. But also the key that you just made is beautiful, which is this one. Say your job is computer programmer, product designer, project manager, and they decide, you know what? We'd also like to make sure that you also clean the latrines for the next 2 months, because we've lost our custodian. So we want you to do all the job that you do, but we also would like you then to clean the custodian, to clean the commodes. And we want you to do that with a shovel and perhaps a toothbrush. Now, your question gets to be where Gene is. How much do I want to keep this job?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the answer that most of us wind up with. Where's the toothbrush at?
yeah,
Right?
for a period of time.
But it's got to be overwhelmingly affecting me to the point where I don't think the benefits
Right.
are worth me doing it. And our tolerance for that is very long when it comes to employment.
Well, now you actually put a nice light at the end of that tunnel when you said for 2 months. There's a light there. There's the end time. And so, the mentality may be, I can do that for 2 months.
Correct.
Right. To help out the company, maybe it'll be less, maybe more, but I can, like Sarah says, I can help out the company. I can be a part of what's good for the company.
Sure.
And a lot of that is going to depend on how you feel about the company.
Okay.
If you're there just so that you can, take home your paycheck, you may not be as vested.
Okay.
But if you really are interested in what the company does and their contribution to the community, blah, 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 then you may be more inclined to go that way.
And you tell the difference in a worker, see what their what drives them and what motivates them. You can tell real quick after working there.
Yeah. And let's say that the initial period was 2 months, but you're such a good latrine cleaner, we decided not to hire a custodian back, because not only are you getting done what you got done, you're taking care of the custodial needs. That's a position we don't need to hire. Now, you'll know that situation where sometimes your company doesn't replace fired people because they go, here you go, here you go. Right? You're taking necessarily the responsibility, but at the same time, you're not as willing to walk. No matter sometimes the poke they put on your plate. You will do it if the benefits you believe are afforded.
The preceding has been edited for
Right?
That brings up an interesting thing. I was just thinking, we built the tower for Dominion. They were behind schedule, so morale was low. They were working 7 days a week and nights. So they had people volunteer to work on the weekends for a series of hours to kind of help with morale and really bad things. Like I was cleaning up, But it was interesting to see how many people volunteered every week. How many people didn't volunteer at all. It was just very interesting. You could tell the political climate by who was volunteering every week.
Yeah.
It was very interesting to see.
Because volunteering and employment are two different things, even though many of the responsibilities are the same. Your tolerance for how much you can bear is a lot higher when you're employed.
That's true.
Sometimes in employment, probably in volunteering too, you can or may be willing to do above and beyond. You're getting those and getting the pats on the back, and that
Right.
boosts your own
Yeah.
morale, so you're more willing to go above and beyond and do your best because you're positive.
He's noticed you.
Right.
You know, you're right on top of this, and this is helping to illustrate what Terry just said. If you've been in a job for several years and you're really good at it, the money's automatic. Right now, you want to know your value, what your worth is with the company. And the attaboys, you say they don't matter, but they do. And they're not necessarily pats on the back. Sometimes they're bonuses, but sometimes they're people coming and recognizing your contributions and they matter. That's why you do it when you're there after several years. Because watch this. In America, where capitalism rules, if you work for someone else after a certain period of time, you can't get paid enough, according to you. Right? When you start a job, typically you go, this much. You work there 5 years and they're going, they only pay me this much. Because as Americans, we kind of cap out and going, well, they don't pay me enough to do all this, except they actually are paying you enough to do this. But you don't do it just for the money after a while. After a while, you do it for the bennies. And a lot of that is, how do I matter to this company? Probably like that lady over there. High value lady.
When you've been with a company, I mean, volunteerism doesn't necessarily have a length of time to it,
Right.
because it could be for a particular project,
Right.
like Habitat for Humanity,
Yep.
right? So your volunteering is sometimes a very finite period of time.
Yep.
Or you may be with the same organization, but it's a different thing you're volunteering with that company. So it's finite. Whereas with your job, okay, maybe not so much anymore, but it used to be people stayed at their jobs like for a long period of time.
30 years.
Right. And yeah, but nowadays it's not so much.
Right.
You get high turnover, especially with younger people. Now, our older people, they tend to stay, right? But your younger folks, they're coming in for 3 to 5 years, getting some skills and moving on.
Yes, 3 to 5 is a long time. The new gig economy, as my son calls it, is
True.
doing multiple things at the same time and just kind of whatever I feel like doing.
Yeah.
And money streams from a variety of different places.
When they hear that you've been with the company for 23, 25 plus years, people look at you like,
Why?
why?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why not?
But that's our
Exactly.
I think part of it, yeah.
Exactly. And so it's very interesting sometimes with just that employee versus the volunteer, because most of the time, and maybe as they get older, their employment will last longer. I don't know. Who knows? I
That's
don't know.
really interesting.
It'll be interesting to see.
and I think that it has to do kind of with the values our parents taught you was get a job and keep it.
Mhm.
Right. The values today suggest we've got young people with a lot of high debt and their jobs aren't equal to paying it off. So they're inventing different jobs. And then I just saw yesterday the top 50, what does my wife call them? What do you call those things? They're non-jobs? Side hustles. Top 50 side hustles. And in that, where people make $30 to $50 an hour is life influencer. You know the degree you need for, life coach. Do you know the degree you need for that? A degree of difficulty. You need to do maybe a handstand. But pretty much, if you can somehow get on your resume life coach, you can then advertise and people will pay you to tell them what to do. Wish that job was available when I was a youngster. It doesn't matter if you're good at it. There's not a lot of consequences. You need to go there. It's like being a fortune teller, but like for real. Yes, sir.
Are we going to, or is there a place within our discussion where we talk about volunteerism within employment?
No, but it may work that way with the next category, which is the next country. So it may make itself a component. Because we talked a little bit about kind of volunteering a little bit within, because that's what's heritage.
Right, well,
It goes above her responsibilities, goes above the contributions because that's for the good of.
that's a little different from what I have in mind, because she's doing it on her own.
Yep.
She sees an
You
issue.
have the committees and stuff that happen in the job place, like, an employee,
Blood drive.
employee participation committee, because we have those, right? Those that you can volunteer your time for within your job. Is that what you're saying?
Speaking of something a little different even from that.
Okay.
I'm speaking of a manager standing in front of a group of a half dozen people, every one of them capable of doing the task that is an employment-based task. And he says, who will handle this? And so whose hand goes up first? That's a different kind of volunteerism, and it oftentimes has a different kind of motivation.
Okay, but see, I don't know that that's distinctive in this way. Because certainly my department will ask for that to happen. People still get paid. It's just a matter that maybe it's overtime or it's something that's different, but it's not out of the ordinary in terms of it's something that's in your skill set. It's just a matter of who wants to do it. But that doesn't mean that it's not important to our conversations because, especially if we get to the next question, some of that will uncover. Okay. And the next question is, because I think we've done a pretty good job. What's a volunteer, right? Mm-hmm. What's an employee? What's a servant?
Now, there are a couple of different kinds of servants.
Should I put these definitions up here for you that you've got for your volunteering?
Oh,
sure. Just so you've got it. We haven't really talked about servant.
Sorry.
We haven't really talked about servant much.
Because there's, there you go. In England, the maid and the butler are referred to as servants. Mm-hmm. But they're employed.
Correct.
Okay. But, okay, the bond servant that Paul's referring to himself as had no financial benefit to it.
Correct. And that's why we're putting that there, because you're right. Essentially, all of us that have jobs in today's modern world are servants.
Correct.
When the Bible says in Ephesians, slaves obey your masters, they're talking to us employees of companies. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, in that time, they were talking about a different dynamic, but essentially, it's saying operate according to the tenets of your company, unless your company is in direct defiance of what honors the Lord. Right?
You work
As unto the Lord.
Yeah.
Correct. And so when you see this, your definition of a servant, and it says not an employee, what we're talking about is, I want us to think what Gene just talked about, a bond servant.
Yeah, I would say that there is a financial component. So there was a financial component.
But we're going to have to almost wait until our next study to talk about the debt we're working on.
Okay.
Because right now, most Christians don't even understand the debt you're talking about.
That's exactly right.
We bandy it about and we say it, we make songs about it, but we really don't get it. So, yes, Steve, you're absolutely correct. And it's a financial one because of the words that are used. We're going to have to wait until we get to our next study. Gene's going to help us with that. I think Steve will certainly help. Bruce will help, and I think probably the guy here will help us because when we take a look at debt, I didn't want to get churchy yet on this, but when we take a look at debt as a Christian, we don't get it at all. In fact, we don't really think we have any because when we sing Jesus paid it all, we don't recognize there's still a responsibility. When you get bailed out of jail, right? Not that any of you probably hasn't happened. When you get bailed out of jail, someone comes and they put money up for you to get out of jail. Now, there's a responsibility. Even though you get out of jail free, there's a responsibility. Some of that responsibility is you can't leave the locality in which you're in. You need to be responsible to the person who put the bail up for you. Now, in the case of bail, which is in some ways a poor allegory, Jesus doesn't lose his money. But we don't talk about the responsibilities when there's been an exchange. We're going to talk a lot about our next step.
So now I'm going to have to go back, and now there are actually 3 different types of servitude.
Okay.
Okay. You've got the butler and the maid and that sort of thing in Europe, and they're salaried people. They may even have a place to live included with that.
Yep.
Then you've got the indentured servants that have come to one country or another based upon somebody else's gratitude, and they've got to work that off. And the third is going to be conquered people.
Correct.
They're going to be the ones
Correct.
that, like it or not, you work for me, you're going to gather my water, you're going to cut my wood, that kind of thing. And you get, I think I'll feed you every once in a while, and you get to sleep under this cot. Yep.
Question here, because again, Jesus starts off by teaching only to the Jews. And I know a lot of times the term servant, slave was used at that time. That would be a reference then, like to Roman slaves. That'd be just if he's speaking to Jews only. What was the Jewish definition of a slave at that time?
Okay, wow, what a great question. One you can't really ask in church all the time. So the German.
Yeah, we have four cans.
Und das macht.
Jewish. I know, that's why I was just like, wait, where are we going?
So the Jewish folks understood conquered peoples. They understood that. And I would say, without getting into a whole lot more imagery, tattoos, nose rings were indicative of a conquered peoples, which has become the style. If you're watching, correct, right. But the Jews understood conquered people mentality. Within the Jewish culture, there was slavery, but the slavery looked like it was indenturedness.
So 7 year thing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and thank you, right.
That's what I was thinking
Yeah.
about. But
And because what Jesus does, what Yahweh does, is he already sets the precedent as to what Jesus coming is to foreshadow. And so what it does is you're a slave for 7 years, and then your debts are then you're freed again. And your debts are erased. But even after 50 years, let's say you had land that you lost in some sort of arrangement. You had land that you lost. After 50 years, the land would revert back to its original owner.
Is that Jubilee that we talked about before?
okay.
Yes. So the Jewish mindset about slavery was far different than the rest of the world. But having been conquered by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by the Egyptians, by the Greeks, and by the Romans, now when we meet them, they understand the slavery of the Western world in where they live at this point. Okay? But it's very, very different. And so when Jesus is talking about the economy of slaves to masters, he's not talking about the junk that went on here in the United States, which was an incredible, which was taking it far beyond what even our pastors, because our pastors and leaders in the United States didn't use the Bible, except with the verbiage to help people understand slavery because they endorsed it. But the slavery of the United States was not the slavery of the Bible or the economy that God gave the Israelites with the law.
There was also among the Jewish people, there was a kind of a rule, I think it's even written, that you did not have a slave that was also Jewish. You were going to have a slave that was a Gentile.
Yeah, and there's examples of that even in the scriptures where we can talk and do that. So maybe we'll do some online discussion to talk about that kind of slavery because that's correct. And Steve laughing at the history, recognizing a tattoo, a nose ring, an earring were the least of your conquered people expressions. Yeah, that's what you wanted at the very least. But typically there can be a lot of other terrible indicators that you were a slave. But Gene is kind of right in saying that there's three levels because, for instance, Alfred, who is the butler of Bruce Wayne, is effectively a servant, right? But he's a paid servant. But we're going to take a look kind of at what pulls these three together for him. There's the bond servant, of which really is what Paul's talking here and what the Bible's talking about. And I would almost challenge you, the slavery that this country initially experienced was based on being an indentured or a bond servant, okay? Until free labor got to be the way to make money for this new growing and burgeoning country. And then the third item is the one that Gene mentioned, which is not really what's referenced here, but we'll talk a little bit about those elements, which is a conquered peoples. Okay? And what you'll see here on the board is that there are some things that describe what a servant is, that they perform duties, they perform responsibilities within the home, outside the home, or for the business of the person who effectively is, if not even an employer, is a master.
Yeah, and you have in the Old Testament the illustration Joseph in this primarily, where he's got Potiphar, and so he's been bought now. He's owned by Potiphar. Okay, that's one level, but then he ends up in jail, and so now he ends up getting to a different level of servitude by the jailer, saying, "Hey, you do things well. Things happen when you're around. We're going to bring you up to this level." So now he's I think today they might call those trustees. I've never been to judges.
Well, it sounds like you have.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, exactly, becomes a trustee.
yeah, so there's now they're within servitude, they're varying levels.
Old Testament wise, we see a fun example of this happening with Yaakov and Laban. Jacob and Laban. Jacob, in order to get the hot sister,
Yes, hot sister.
right, becomes a bondservant for 7 years.
Imagine.
And then,
And then gets tricked because of the custom of preventing the brides. And instead of Jacob asking the right questions and maybe taking out a flashlight, he gets indentured for another 7 years.
Okay, now,
Unfortunately, he gets them both at the.
yeah, we're chuckling here, but there are a lot of folks that don't understand the tradition that took place then, was so that he would wake up the next morning and find Leah. And because basically the bride is brought to him wedding night,
Correct.
and obviously his D cells were out, and he couldn't turn the flashlight on, and he finds out in the morning when there's lights, oh, you're not the one I wanted.
Right.
You're the librarian. I
Right.
wanted the model.
But perhaps instead of consummating the marriage, he perhaps should have said, "Can we wait until the morning and have this discussion?"
Yeah.
And
No.
talk first.
Not happening.
Nope.
Yeah.
So that is waiting
Yeah.
for a bound chicken bound wow.
Yeah.
He just said, I heard her voice and said,
He wasn't caring too much.
Maybe we've been drinking.
oh,
I'm sure he's partying and going, 7 years is almost up. You're gonna be my wife. He wouldn't care.
they're not talking.
He wouldn't care about talking. He went 7 years.
Yeah, it's like premarital counseling. It's like, just be down already. Because, the lady's like, very interesting. The guy's like, yeah. That's the lady after the premarital counseling, after the wedding is over. That's the guy before.
That's pretty much it.
That's that counseling over.
We have really moved away from the Jewish tradition, haven't we?
Yeah, we're just being truths. It's a person. Yeah, how do you not know that it's the woman you've been focusing on? You got one thing on your mind.
I don't care.
Yeah. It was a long walk the morning after. I was like, oh my God.
So, he's a different do-over, so
Yeah.
still got mulligan for this guy.
Yeah, man, like your makeup.
Well, it's like Superman, Clark Kent.
Yeah.
No, not so much. Okay. So, we're waxing a little silly with servitude, but helping you understand that what we're describing is what the model was in the Jewish community. It existed in the Old Testament, and it's referred to, at least in some regard, by the scholarly Paul during the course of his letters. But Paul also knows very much what he's talking about when he describes himself to be a bondservant, a servant, a doulos. Because that's what that word is.
Yeah, and I think that's also a good note to make. In the Greek, that there are different words for different kinds of servants that are being used, and one of them is where we get our English word deacon.
Correct. So, in what conditions would you allow yourself to be a servant?
Really hard.
That's why I'm asking, sister.
Because we've been told to do whatever makes you feel good, and whatever you would think of.
In which sense?
Not in the Alfred to Batman sense. In the sense to bondservant or conquered peoples.
where Batman really works, because Alfred really is what he heard of. This is
things that I realize there are sort of.
I appreciate you weighing in there, lady. I will challenge that, but anybody know what Alfred calls Bruce Wayne? Bigger,
Does he call it master?
Master Wayne. Master Wayne.
That's green.
Thinks he said master Wayne.
Is that just the formal way to address until we say Mr., a British type of?
Well, yeah, because like Steve's mom, when she sends cards sometimes to the boys, she says Master Daniel Jenkins.
That's
Or
that's
Master
the
Nathan.
official way to address a young man younger than 18.
I didn't know that.
But
No, it's getting a 1099 or it doesn't.
They got a workers' comp policy to cover Alfred in case he gets hurt.
And he gets paid enough to clean the back cave, so.
So, Western world, not really. That's why we have trouble with this. Current day example of what that is.
so if we take and we say that servant has those three levels, this buttling, right, is going to fit into that first level. And look, I don't disagree with what my wife's saying, but that's why we've eliminated that category. Because if you watch, for instance, there's a movie, it's called The Butler, and it is about a gentleman who serves 4 different presidents as their butler. And you will discover, yes, he has a paycheck, but his role is that of doing whatever the master wants and needs. Doing whatever the master wants and needs. And that's where Alfred comes into play. Yes, he has a 1099. Yes, he can file for unemployment. Yes, he probably has a healthy retirement.
401k, is that what
Probably, yeah. But his job is mostly to anticipate the needs of his master and to do what his master wants.
So you're saying, in essence, from what I was thinking this a minute ago, way different from the guy who works on the Batmobile.
Yeah,
Because
that's Lucius Fox.
that guy, yeah, so I'm all over
Sorry.
that part.
I love it. I love it.
Because his role is to take care of him, not just on a employment level, but on a personal level.
Yes,
And there is difference there.
correct.
And it may not be technical difference, but it is almost unspoken that I'm taking care of you. And there's some crossover there.
Yes.
It's like being at a playground with 100 kids, and a kid that's not mine fell down and got hurt. I would try to help. What's different if it's my kid. I'm trying to help too, but it goes to a different level.
Yes.
I think that employment, when you're taking care of someone's being, food, finances, there's a level of servanthood there that's unspoken that money almost can't touch.
I agree. And the picture that I like about this, that my wife, because just make believe.
It's really real.
The relationship between Alfred and Bruce Wayne is one that is very familiar.
Yeah, well, he has been, Master Wayne has been Master Wayne to him since Master Wayne was
Yeah.
in short pants.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Correct. And their relationship at this point is very, very much surrogate dad
Yes, indeed.
to the son. Because his parents are dead, and so
But back to the point I was making was he's probably called him Master Wayne since he was indeed very young.
Yes.
And so that's become not just a way of addressing and maybe even affection, but it is kind of establishing it. I'm kind of your older guy, I need to kind of take care of you. So there is a whole bunch of different facets. So master has a different kind of meaning when Alfred uses it.
correct. And that's even different from when we're watching Roots or movies about the United States slavery, because there's an endearing quality there. But here's the thing, because my wife now has hurt my feelings very greatly, the reality of the back pain, We're going to eliminate that level of service and focus on bond servant and conquered peoples.
So now, back to your question of how we feel about being back.
Yes, and Diane said, as Americans, we don't feel like being there.
Yeah. I think that's true. We're, and that becomes problematic for the Christian in America because we're not so interested in being even a servant of Christ. And thus we're bad at it.
Wow. See, the funny thing is, you just leapfrogged for me in an interesting way. I almost would have said we start with being service to each other, let alone serve, because we're not very good service to each other. We play at it, and servants to Jesus is kind of a whole different level. And it's partly why I will hint strongly to it's why Paul has the same amount of shame. Right? Because essentially what he's been called to do, we'll get there when we get there. See what he's been called to do? He doesn't look like a scholarly man of the Sanhedrin. He doesn't look like a scholarly next generation rabbinical giant in the eyes of the populace. He looks like a sea pig. He looks like a babbler. Because he's spouting stuff that seems to be anti-Rome, anti-Greece, and certainly anti-Yahweh.
Well, but what you just described, though, is not the Jewish perspective of Paul. That's just going to be the Greek perspective of Paul.
Greek perspective is going to look like that. The Jewish perspective of Paul is a little of that, though, because where does Paul go when he goes from town to town? Goes to the synagogues first. And when he's usually rejected at the synagogues, then he goes to the marketplace. So the Jewish scholars, the Jewish rabbis in other places find him to be
Undesirable.
heretical. Yeah.
Offensive?
Yeah, offensive, heretical, undesirable. Yes.
Yeah, and the old joke that Dr. Wimp used to make was whenever Paul landed in a town, he would go and see what the jail looked like first because he was going to end up there.
Yeah. If not outside the city walls, dead. Are you okay with being a servant?
I agree.
As a female, I feel like I've had
I'm sorry.
that whole JU
Gotcha.
article. Just,
Gotcha.
anyway,
Gotcha.
you know, with children, you kind of learn to put needs first a little bit than your husband, but still, even then,
Right.
there's
Right.
just hard to get out of the way.
Yes.
He deserves it, and that's the only thing I think keeps me striving is because he actually deserves that level of love and care that I should be giving him.
And we don't get it as Americans. We're going to see it played out right now with the Afghanistan situation in terms of what is expected as servitude from certainly women and children. You're going to see it played out and read about it in your news articles. Now, I would also tell you, servitude is better understood by communist countries. North Korea understands servitude way better than we do. Communist China understands servitude way better than we do. India, with its caste systems, tells people they are born servants and they can't rise above that particular rank. They understand servitude better. We don't. And I like when Diane says, you know, we marry for better, for worse, we rich or for poor, we take a vow, a covenant to have a relationship where essentially we're saying, I'm going to think about you first before me. And there are times when we do, but for the most part, it's kind of like, I'm going to do that, but what am I getting out of this? What am I getting out of this? And I will share with you what am I getting out of this permeates not just the Christian household, but certainly the American household, because divorce happens because of irreconcilable differences. And irreconcilable differences is, did you read the article where there were Afghanis, who just set a lady on fire a couple nights ago? You know why they did it? If you read the article?
Then you want to divorce him?
They said they didn't like the food that she cooked. They didn't like the food, so they cooked her. They lit her on fire. Now, that sounds awful and terrible, but I will also tell you that that was the economy without Jesus and Yahweh's spirit instilled in it in the Jewish law.
That's exactly right.
If you cooked a meal that your husband did not like, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and that let will allow him out of that marriage. Or Bruce.
See,
Exactly.
she might cook something bad just.
Yes, and that's the feeling with this Afghani situation is that the ladies are being corralled and forced to not only serve the men, but also marry the men. And they're underage ladies that are on display being asked to do this, not asked, forced to do the same thing. And so in cooking for the guys, some of the ladies probably just went, I don't necessarily cook. I don't want to cook, and cook something maybe that was a little less palatable. The punishment was because you didn't serve me well enough, because I'm pretty much going to light you on fire. And that's okay.
A world where you can't go out in public without a man with you.
Correct.
You, and then certain places, I'm sure you can't go. You can't be talking anything.
Correct.
So then what's in the corner?
Correct.
And you better not be talking just spoken to.
Correct.
That is. I can't fathom that.
No.
Well, we should wrap our Constitution is based on the Bible and biblical principles. That's not.
Yes. And that's what's so wrong about Americans / Christians not embracing what this country was founded on, to recognize that our values come right.
Which I think circles all the way back to about 20 minutes ago, when you were asking a question on through about how far I willing to go. Because I think there's got to be, I think it does play into me personally, being selfless. Selfless, I will serve me. And so in order to serve my wife and my kids, I have to put my stuff aside. And I'm not really good at that. And naturally speaking, I want to.
Okay, just ignore it.
Okay. But I think it circles back to this. What, and this is, and therein lies, and I only give you my thought, and then I think in this thought therein lies the problem. It really depends on what my values are, or what my end game is in regards to what I believe moralistically. And then because that is so vague right now, where we live, everyone's saying this is what is right, and I don't care what you think, and I don't. There's no absolute. This is how I feel, or this is how I identify, all that stuff. So it just confuses everyone to an extent. So for me, looking at the end game, where's the eternal impact on this, and that's what I want to strive. Everyone has different views on what that is because there's no absolute truth. So it everything's conflicted. But I think it's got, for me, servanthood, it goes back to what she just said about what our country is built on. And when that is thrown out the door, there's no absolute, there's no direction. It's completely amorphous. It's nothing. Whatever you want it to be at that point.
I think servanthood in the United States looks like this whatever. And for some, it's Bruce Wayne, because a lot of us, if we think about being a servant, that would be a kicking servant opportunity. I get high-tech toys. I get to live in a cool mansion, and I get to service all the gadgets and stuff. Plus, I have access to literally billions of dollars. That's why, in some ways, where my wife is, I will agree with my wife here begrudgingly, is that's a sexy kind of servanthood. Which is the entire difference, is that a lot of us, first of all, Mother Teresa didn't just hang out with the homeless. She hung out with the homeless in Calcutta, where if you want to talk about filth and human waste, in addition to cattle waste, the woman is a saint.
Well, and then it's destitution, it's disease, it is for the Western American mind, it's faithful.
It's the worst mission trip ever.
Oh,
Worst mission trip ever.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, no, we cannot identify with that because our definition of poverty here is very different from there. Because, I mean, poverty is standing in the median saying, would you give me money for some coffee?
But then I go out and I call on my cell phone, I call
Exactly.
Starbucks,
On your
and then I
way,
come back and I put my sign in.
yeah, on your way back to BMW. So, but, you know, and so that's here, there's maybe not a stitch of clothing.
Correct. Correct. And we would be completely weirded out in that kind of environment. So would you put up the next question and the answer there? Because we kind of
So
talked.
the answer,
Yeah, go ahead. So being a servant include honoring, obeying, fidelity, faithfulness, and even a good temper, truthfulness, good stewardship, excellence, and gratitude.
Can you rewind a couple of those for me?
Sure.
And I'm just, stepping in it, I apologize.
Yeah.
Number one, I think we need to probably get a better understanding of what it means as a servant to honor. And then number two, the economy thing there, the stewardship, that, I don't know that we understand that either. Honoring and stewardship don't seem to jive with us, these days in this part of the world.
Okay. So honoring, now probably if I'm going to substitute a word, I'm going to say finding worthiness, finding worthfulness in the master. That despite of how you feel, despite that he might be J. Paul Getty, who was a despised billionaire. If you are his manservant, if you are his lady servant, you find a way to find him of worth, in spite of what other people think.
And I'm telling you, that statement right there is so biblical, but so antithetical to everything in my heart and brain. I put people in moral situations, or moral perspectives, and say, I don't honor that guy, I don't honor Steve.
Right.
But the guy down the street at the gas station, he dropping that phone, whatever. No, that's creation. He hadn't accepted that yet or given his heart back to it, but that's hard.
That's all we got.
Yeah,
That's God's creation and God loves them.
yeah.
So the discussion you both are having right now is the content in Romans 1 through 17. Paul's going to tell you about his responsibility to those people you just brought up. You mentioned stewardship. So just because the master has a lot of needs, it doesn't mean that I use more than is necessary, because I should value the items that he owns and possesses as if they were my own.
But that, the reason I brought that up is because that indicates a different kind of responsibility that in, again, our Western world, we don't see the servant having with the master's stuff.
Correct.
Because we don't get that, right? And that's why I wanted to bring up the question, because there's a contextualism there, there's a cultural setting there that we don't get. And again, back to Joseph, Potiphar said, I'll just make sure I get fed in time. That's all he was saying.
Right.
And the jailer, the same thing. Joseph was given responsibility and availability of those resources.
Yeah.
And typically in our country in the mid 1800s, that was a different kind of world.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny thing is, when I take a look at this list, there's some, I think, really good things there. But the thing that stands out for me the most is probably something you'd be a little bit surprised at. What stands out for me on this list is the one that's second from the bottom.
I was going to say that too, because you think of where Joseph started out.
Yep.
He didn't start out in charge of everything. He started out at the bottom, but
Yep.
because of his excellence
Yes.
and honor
Yes.
and all those things, he moved up and gained favor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even jail.
And
Yeah.
people noticed him.
Correct.
So,
But
yeah, he was witnessing without even speaking.
But again, in our mid 1800s here, it was do what I gotta do so that I don't get whipped.
Yes, yes, and that's why that whole economy, in many ways, works better for the adversary than it does for the Lord trying to teach on serving.
That's right.
Slavery. Because when we think slavery now, we cannot think about the economy that's posed by the Bible. Americans and Westerners are always going to think about what happened in this country and from its founding to civil rights. And that's what we're going to think about. When the economy of the Bible is quite different.
Yeah. And so and this basically plays into the biblical illiteracy we have today, where folks don't know what the Bible says. And so consequently, they hear about the Bible saying something about slavery, and they don't read, they don't follow it, they don't even contextualize it. They rewind to civil rights and slavery of our day, and that's all that stuff.
And they're done with the conversation.
That's
They
exactly.
can't get past it. And you're right. And that's why it's important that we have this discussion to be able not only to understand this ourselves, but be able to engage a 1619 world, a critical race theory world that's stuck on a narrative that doesn't understand why and how this country was founded, which is on the principles of Judeo-Christian values. And my mantra these days, in many ways, is this: it's your decision to not necessarily follow Jesus, but if you follow his principles, all of this junk that we're dealing with right now in the world would not be junk we begin.
That's right.
So you don't have to believe in Jesus. That's your responsibilities and consequences. But if we follow the principle he taught and modeled, we wouldn't be dealing with this junk that we're dealing with. Right? And so that's why we have to know this stuff. That's why you guys have to internalize this stuff so that no conversation is off limits for you to have. Because when a person whose color or tan is different from yours, and they start telling you that you're entitled and you're overprivileged, you can then say, person, because that's the person's name, person, you're thinking perhaps about the history of this country as opposed to the history upon which this country was founded. Let me show you what the Bible's talking about, because what we've done is far different than what Jesus taught. Right? And then that perhaps creates a different level of conversation with a person who believes that you're going to be talking from a position of empowerment, a position of privilege, a position of you have more than everybody else, and in many ways, because of what we'll ultimately talk about, you have more than anybody else, but not because of yourself.
Right. But let's face it, you can present that a lot more readily than I can, because I'm already presenting from the position of privilege. And so that's going to be in their mind. Yeah, but look who's saying, look who's talking. You're the one basically trying to manifest authority over me and using the Bible against it. So I lose at the very beginning.
I think there's some truth in that. I think you could flip that script as well to your advantage in a position like that. But you have a greater opportunity to be able to say, we messed this up.
Right.
And to be real with that, and just even to say, church.
Yeah.
And because I think that's almost coming to a middle ground to say, because I think what you're saying is very true. People almost discount you because of who you are, right? Be able to have to get into a conversation to say, listen, I get that.
Right.
On many levels, can we just talk about that? Because I think if they have any desire to understand and grow, they will come to that conversation. Some people, like we talked about, it doesn't matter what it says.
Yeah, they just want to argue. They don't really want to grow.
And so, but you have to, there's a fine line there too, to not fall into the whole CRT world, so that, you're not saying, okay, they're right and I'm responsible for your plight. Okay? You have to strike a balance because it's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do something that I think Steve is encouraging us to do that we may not do well. You got to practice this stuff. You got to practice scenarios and be ready to have an answer for the folks who are presenting the accusation, because you can diffuse some of this stuff quickly if you can get them to the point to recognize, look, it's been done wrong. And you don't need to say, I did it wrong.
Yeah.
It's been done wrong.
Yeah.
Let me show you. And when you can do that, you at least have the argument going to a reasoned area, even if the person discards everything that you say later. You don't have to agree with CRT, critical race, any of that sort of stuff to be able to say, it's been done incorrectly. And it's been done incorrectly because of the nature of people. And when you can get someone to kind of agree with you that politics, which is people text, messes stuff up, you can get the conversation diffused and on a different way.
And I think another level of that helps is to say, and I'm in a situation right now where I've had to say to the person, we're going to look at this differently, you know that, right? Yeah. Let's just put that aside for a second.
Yep.
We're going to look at this differently, but we both, you know that, I know that. But, you know, there's certain things that are our opinions, there's certain things that are true. We got to work our way to that. But obviously we're going to look at this differently. Let's put that aside right now, and let me just say, here's ABC, or we haven't done the right, or what hasn't been. That doesn't mean I accept all of your objective perspective of the issue, because we're not going to agree on that yet. But I think it's about building trust in a relationship at some point. And if someone's really open on that, it takes time to work. It's selfless.
Well, my wife hears me say all the time, the matter of people is messy.
Yeah.
And Christians would prefer not to wade into it because we have enough of it in our jobs.
Yeah.
If we don't have enough of it in our jobs, our families
Yeah.
present almost all the messiness we can handle without messing with people in some ways. If I just stay out of it, it won't be another issue I got to deal with.
Right.
People are messy. And, you know, when I think that there's a lot of interesting things that inform sometimes even how we do this stuff. And when Diane says, you know, my oldest daughter, where there was a lot of promise, when she says, you know, I almost don't want to go back to church because I'm sick of getting beaten up. So sick of hearing, well, here's the thing. There's a way to teach what we teach right now and beat up the cause. And the cause is us, and the cause is how the church has been mispresented. And there's a way to perhaps do it so that people don't feel like they're being whipped personally every week. And that's kind of why we have the dialogue and the discussion, to be able to say, you guys have had these experiences in your regular lives. So it's not just me telling you and whipping you. You guys know that these things exist. And that's how, you know, for a young person like her to say, I don't want that kind of experience in church anymore. Well, some of that experience, when done right, is one to help us understand when people are involved, we get it wrong a lot.
The perfect example of what you just said is the woman at the well. And in regards to the disciples' perspective about her, and the difference between Jesus' perspective about her. Even when that moment was over, they still did not get it, because there was judgment almost innate in them. And Jesus totally flipped that script. So what Gene is saying is very, it's probably a fear of a lot of Christians that if I humbly go into a conversation about an issue, if I go into humbly, then it just means I'm agreeing with everything that you are surmising. And that's not true. And Jesus wasn't worried about his divinity being discarded by this lady. I mean, they went back and talked about their coming Messiah, and there was not a point he was like, oh, she thinks the right thing about who I am. No, he was just trying to love her in the moment, and she got that.
Again, I think we're going to build on this because those are the building blocks of what a servant includes. The next question we're going to start with next week, and we'll be virtual next week, is what's there in a good servant? Not bad.
That's not on that list. Just
Even good temper.
watch what we're gonna say. Is it coming from the prideful self, or is it? Oh, the Holy Spirit's leading, not me. And that's with my family. You know,
It's easiest to do with the family. Well, you know, and this is part of what Matt's saying, is when we can actually get into the position where we have had a part in removing the emotion from the discussion and being able to basically reason instead, that gets us a long way, because and let's face it, we all have emotions at times to stop it. And when it comes down to, and emotions can be frustration, anger, you know, pity, and there's a whole gamut of things that we could be feeling. on either side of the discussion, we have to diffuse that. And like you said, through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, say that which is very reasonable. God tells us, come, let us reason together. He wants us to use our mind. And we have to step the emotion aside and say, okay, let's look at this from a reasonable perspective.
I think that's a brilliance that escapes a lot of believers, a lot of Christians, a lot of churchgoers all the time. And in that vein of what you're saying and what Diane's sharing, my last point is going to be about Joseph. And I think I had this discussion with my wife just this week because I understand the Bible principle, I understand the Bible account, but when I think about what Diane says about watching kind of your mouth, watching what comes out, I'm going, there's two really good points when Joseph could have jacked some folks up. And this is from my perspective. And so I said to my wife, one of those is, how come he doesn't tell Potiphar that his wife is pretty much a troll? His wife had designs on him. Now, that's my perspective. Now, my wife is probably where Steve is, and my wife is going, he can't. That's right. And I'm going, well, yeah, he better. And she's going, he can't. And I'm going, what do you mean about that?
It's his station.
Correct. He's in trouble whether he speaks about the situation or whether he does what he does, which is run away. He can't do anything. And that's, if there's anybody that shows you a precursor of a suffering servant, it's Joseph before the real suffering servant. Because I'm going, there's got to be 17 ways for Joseph to get out of this deal. And my wife is kind of going, can't do all the stupid stuff you're thinking about him doing. What if he takes his batarang out and be like, what is called? Can't do it. Joseph gets in jail and he hooks up these two brothers. Well, hooks up one of them.
Opposite ends of the spectrum.
So he hooks up some brothers with some information. And then one guy basically said, look, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough. I get back up to the camp, gotta tell him about you. Good. Don't give a note to the warden and say, Warden, can you send this to the king or send it to the guy and tell him, the cupbearer, you forgot about me.
Well, isn't that again a matter of the cupbearer?
He can't do it.
That's right. He really can't.
He's a prisoner. He has no rights. He's at least a trustee. He can't do it. I get frustrated with that. So when Diane said, can't we kind of mind our mouth? Sometimes he says, no.
Yes. Yeah. And there's so many for about 5 minutes.
And I'm in shackles, but
Well, and again, I'm kind of looking at this thing from Joseph's perspective, where it's like, okay, is he going to listen to me, the foreigner, the servant, the slave, or his wife? And if he has a choice between the two, yeah, he chooses the servant, then he's on the sofa at least. You know?
she's hot, but there's other hot. There's hot around for other hot. Sorry, hot for his wife.
Happy wife, happy life. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but the other component is, are you telling me I don't satisfy my wife? And then you
Well, marriage is what like that.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Right. So like we see it as,
Yeah.
right. She has to be called to him and
Right. So it wasn't. It wouldn't have been so much a matter of that. It would have been a matter of their station. It would have been a matter of, wait, you want me to publicize to the world that my wife went after this slave?
I'm boy, you me.
Yeah.
don't.
He's going to take the road of the greater advantage. That's not what it's supposed to be.
Right.
Greater advantage.
But one of the things that I've been sort of thinking about is, and probably why we screwed this up so bad, is when you think about slavery in the ancient world, and there were immediate consequences to screwing up.
Oh boy.
Right? You screwed something up, and there was an immediate reaction. But in our situation, and when we're bond service to Christ, there is not necessarily, not that you might see anyway. There are always consequences to decisions that you make. but there's no immediate backing.
Yeah.
I thought you were going in, you know, taught my kids, when you work, texting them. Don't remember that I said as you're working. But I've seen them do that, but a lot of kids don't have children. They don't have, like my kid had that conversation with me about character. What do you mean it reflects on you? What, you know, it's just like we're not teaching them basics that can even be tied in biblically.
They are, but
I mean, it's they don't get it. They'll never get it because they never were taught. It'll be harder, much harder. If we're not making it.
You're right, but we are the folks dropping the ball. We're supposed to have the mind of the Holy Spirit. He's supposed to manage, lead, guide, direct us, and we fail to teach. You know, the whole Son of God thing is not because Jesus is God's Son. It's because he's a direct reflection. So when we tell our kids that what you do has an impact on us in this household, well, that's kind of when we understand Jesus' incarnate relationship to being God, how we'd be able to help them understand it. But we don't get it because we kind of think that, you know, God's the guy with the beard, and Jesus is kind of the guy on the bike, the motorcycle, and the Holy Spirit's kind of like Casper.
Oh, I have that.
Because that's good.
I'm serious about that, right?
Something that this discussion has said has brought to mind a comparison between how Christians ought to be raising their kids and an understanding that I think we have in our secular world when folks go out in their own lives and on their own private time and do something that in the mind of their employer misrepresents the employer. Because if so-and-so puts something out on Facebook or Twitter and says, you know, disparaging comments about blacks or Jews or, you know, take a category, and the employer finds out about it and says, okay, we can't keep you anymore because that reflects badly on us. So they're kind of doing it better than we are in some respects.
That's right, and that's why we have to be able to have that discussion about we belong. We belong because there are institutions that practice parts of this better than we do, and we should be expert at this. Even if we're not teaching, look, when we take away the live for Jesus, live for God aspect, if we just teach people to do the concepts that are in Proverbs, that are in Ecclesiastes, that are in Paul's letters, we just teach people to do it, the turmoil of the world wouldn't be the turmoil of the world.
Yeah, but then we would be legislating our religion upon people as far as they're concerned.
Okay, so I'm not talking about from American principle, but that's what Islam is. By the way, the people that are better are better discipled than we are, do this, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, what we wind up then doing is we call them legalists because they don't do it with the right spirit. They do it because they're supposed to do it. And there's the right melding of servant, the qualities that make a good servant, in addition to what the components are. That's what we're talking